Morning, everybody. Time is now 9:31 a.m. Today's date is February 7th, 2023. This is the time and place for our regularly scheduled business meeting of the Montana Public Service Commission. We are in the Bollinger Room of the PSC. Would I call this meeting to order? Would my colleagues join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance?
Flag, United States of Republic for which it stands.
All right, thank you, colleagues. I would note for the record that Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Pinocci, myself, Vice President Fielder, and Commissioner Bukacek are present and accounted for in the Bollinger Room this morning, so we do have quorum. The Montana Public Service Commission welcomes public comment from any member of the public who is interested on any matter that is on our agenda today or any matter that falls within the jurisdiction of the Montana Public Service Commission. Is there anybody who would like to make public comment in the room? If so, please come forward. All right, very good. Please state your name for the record and spell your last name.
Jack Windsor, W-I-N-S.
All right, Mr. Windsor, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, please proceed.
Perfect. I'm here in regards to the motion to extend the deadline on the Clydesdale junk removal application. There are two companies, Evergreen Disposal and Bitter Disposal, via their lawyers who submitted the application after the deadline to submit protests. There's a few things I'd like to bring to your attention regarding this. One being the timely manner in which previous protests were received, and another one, cases that have been in the past. They quoted two previous applications that had a longer protest deadline than mine. One being 21 days and one being 25 days. First one, Junk Truck with the 21-day notice. They received two protests.
Excuse me, you said than mine. Who are you in this?
I guess
Yeah.
along the Clydesdale junk removal.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The first one was Junk Truck. They had a 21-day protest deadline, and within those 21 days, they received two protests before the notice was even applied. The second one would be Paradise Valley Waste. They were set with a 25-day deadline. They received their protest on the 25th day, but it was on the deadline or within the deadline. Another two cases previously, one would be D&D Services. They were granted a 16-day protest period. Within that 16 days, they received their protest within 1 day on the 30th. Second being Two Men in a Truck. They had a 14-day protest period, and from that notice, they received two protests within the 14th days, one on the 13th, one on the 14th day. Furthermore, looking beyond the last 9 months or so, it appears over the years, it's been quite common for those deadlines shifted anywhere from 31 days to 14 days. And I just wanted to also note that it's been clearly stated that they were notified of this application at the beginning and notified of the deadline from the start. And being with this, had they have had an issue with the timing or confusion over it, they had the time to make the motion before the deadline was up, not necessarily 4 days after the deadline had come up. So kind of in conclusion, it's been clearly stated and expressed that they were notified, and throughout the last years, we've seen this deadline change, not necessarily just to be set 21, 25 days, but anywhere from 31 to 14. So as far as I'm concerned, it was on them. They missed it. And instead of accepting that and just going with their consequences, they're trying to find some sort of scapegoat to get out of it. So I believe that it should be denied in the motion that they had ample time to submit this motion and or protests as we've seen.
Thank you, Mr. Windsor. Colleagues, we're going to do a bit of an unusual adjustment to our agenda this morning. We have a question regarding jurisdiction. I think that Mr. Windsor might be able to answer. Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Windsor, I read through the application materials and your business seems unique. Could you just help us understand what you do? I mean, you go in and help people clean out their houses and that type
Yeah,
of thing?
so anything from just your average homeowner cleaning out their garage, to property managers, realtors, when you have foreclosures, evictions, those types of things. So often they need someone to come in and clean all of that out. And that's just something that's never been offered before. So I kind of filled that gap as well as just continuing on with things for homeowners.
Follow up,
Not weekly, but
Follow up, Mr. President. So just, is the majority of your time spent then actually doing the labor to clean out people's stuff? Or is the majority of your time going to be spent hauling stuff?
so far it's kind of been a good split between the two. Depending on the job, oftentimes we have to make multiple trips, so typically on the road. There may be other guys staying back to keep working at the house, but for the most part, I'm back and forth either to the film site or.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Windsor.
Absolutely.
Any other public commenters in the room? Public commenters in the room, seeing none. Are there any public commenters online? Seeing none. Very good. Okay, there are no changes to the agenda this morning. So let's move into our action items. Action item number 1 is approval of the commission minutes for the week of January 23rd, 2023. Is there a motion, Vice President Fielder?
Mr. President, I move adoption of the minutes.
Is there a second? Mr. Pinocci is seconded. Discussion, changes for the minutes? Commissioner Bukacek?
No.
All right, seeing no discussion, all those in favor of adopting the commission minutes for the week of January 23rd, 2023 signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, minutes for the week of January 23rd, 2023 are adopted unanimously. Our second action item is staff out-of-state travel approval. Mr. Rosequist.
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners. Staff requests approval for Sam Harworth to travel to Oklahoma City, March 12th through the 17th to attend technical qualifications training conducted by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration on root cause analysis and incident investigation procedures. This is required training for pipeline safety inspectors that will focus on PHMSA's root cause program philosophy, as well as various key elements of the program. Training will include how to prepare for investigations, analytical techniques, hardware failure analysis, and common root cause analysis methods. The expected cost of this out-of-state travel is approximately $2,800 and will be funded through the Pipeline Safety Federal Grant. Staff recommends approval, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rosequist. Is there a motion, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you. I move to authorize the travel of Sam Howard to this required training.
Is there a second? Commissioner Pinocci has seconded. Discussion, questions? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. Will, say this is paid for from the grant. Is the grant that we get from PHMSA, is it just a set amount, or does it vary according to things of this nature? Are they added on to it?
The grant can vary. It's a function of the audit, the annual audit that gets conducted on the program, but it does factor in the need to train new pipeline safety program inspectors, and Sam is in the process of going through all of the training for pipeline safety inspectors, so the grant reflects that.
So, Mr. President, so what I'm after is, do we get a certain amount of money from the grant each year? Like, let's say $50,000 we get, I don't know what it is. And then it doesn't make any difference what we spend that on as long as it's for the program. In other words, if we're getting that 50,000 anyway, that's going into paying his costs and all that stuff, then the $2,800 is really being made up by this commission. Because it's over and above what the PHMSA gives. Am I understanding that correctly at all?
Well, I'm not sure, Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, I might have to look into it a little bit further or talk with you more about exactly what you're asking, but I think that the federal grant, the pipeline safety program develops a budget, and that budget will include the need to send inspectors to required training and other national meetings, for example. And so it's my understanding that the grant does account for the need for those things, so that travel, the expectation of that travel is built into the amount that we're getting in the grant.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. Any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner O'Donnell's motion to approve the travel of Sam Harworth signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, travel is approved. Mr. Rosequist. All right, let's move to work session item number 1. This is docket 2023.01.009. This will be Clydesdale Junk Removal LLC. We're here to consider the application for certificate of public convenience and necessity, to consider the motion of Evergreen Disposal Inc. and Waste Connection Inc. of Montana for a late protest. You have the floor.
President Brown and commissioners, before you today is a draft notice of commission action. This concerns the application for public convenience and necessity of Clydesdale Junk Removal LLC. They are seeking to be a Class D motor carrier between all points and places in 4 counties, including Missoula, Lake, Flathead, and Valley County, which is a large service area. We received a motion to extend time to file protests, and alternative motion for hearing and intervention on January 31st, 2 business days after the set deadline in the notice grant. The Bitterroot and Evergreen do have a direct and substantial interest in the application. The protestant's motion is simply to grant late protest. So it is form, or is substance over form, in terms of the title of their motion, but on page 2, they're simply asking to be granted protest into this application. This will not delay the commission in making a decision in the 180-day statutory deadline as required under the Class D applications. Staff recommends granting the motion. Here for any questions.
All right, is there a motion? Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, I will make a motion, and if there is a second, I'd like to explain.
Absolutely.
My motion is to admit Evergreen and Bitterroot into the docket as late protestants.
Is there a second? I will second the motion. Discussion, Vice President Fielder.
Yeah, Mr. President, and I reluctantly make this motion, but I'm under the impression that we had some errors on our end in terms of publishing the notice. And I suspect that if we do not allow these protestants into the docket, that they will have grounds for litigation that could delay the procedure. And so to keep it clean and tidy, I am proposing that we allow them in as late protestants, so that we can just move forward with the docket and reach a determination on it as soon as possible.
Additional discussion? Commissioner O'Donnell?
I feel the same way. I'm usually not a stickler for deadlines, preferring things to just get to the heart of the matter for justice and equity rather than specificity of deadlines. I am of the same mind, I think, as Commissioner Fielder on this thing. My inclination very strongly is to vote no on this, but I will support it because of the fact that, as Commissioner Fielder pointed out, that there were some glitches in apparently glitches in our making sure that this notice was published in a timely fashion. And so therefore, I will support the motion reluctantly, Mr. Chair.
Additional discussion? Commissioner Panoche?
Thank you, Mr. President. So deadlines, I feel, have to be met. Do you feel as staff that we have to extend this because we failed to announce this notice or somehow we didn't get out what information? Can you tell me about that?
Certainly, I believe the reference might be to Vice President Fielder's reference may be to the publication in our business or our agenda materials, procedural glitch of the notice item that we are speaking of. And I again believe that it won't delay any of our other statutory deadlines in this Class D docket.
Follow up. Do we mail out a notice to all concerned parties? Did they get this in writing, perhaps in the mail?
The normal procedure is to publish in newspapers in the affected areas by the application. So we send out notification to newspapers in their area to publish.
Follow up.
Follow up?
So we failed to do that on a timely fashion, or did we get the notice put in all the papers?
The commission sends out that notice to the newspapers at the same time that we publish our notice of application and protest deadline.
Follow up. Follow up. Did we get the notice put in the papers on time?
The notice was put into the papers shortly after we sent it out to each of them. Each may have published at a slightly different time just due to their publishing dates. But they, within a week or so of receiving our notice item, they published. It's in their paper.
No more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Additional discussion, Vice President Fielder?
I will. I'd like to follow up on Commissioner Panoche's question, just to be clear. Did potential protestants have 2 full weeks of notice to get their protest in? Or was, because of our delay on our end, was that 2-week period not available to them?
So protestants would have notice by general publication onto our systems for a full 2 weeks. In their motion, they said that they did not notice the newspaper notice for about a week because it was not published for about a week after we had sent it out.
Follow up, Mr. President.
Follow up.
And it's my understanding that the normal place where the notice would be on our agenda was not published. So it's quite possible that these protestants actually only did have about a week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's the purpose for my motion, Mr. President. And it's a shame, and I'm sorry to the applicant about this. But I think it's what we need to do to make sure that we have a clean docket that's not subject to some unnecessary litigation.
Additional discussion? I have some questions for you. Has the commission set an administrative rule that consistently denotes the time frame by which protestants in Class D cases have to file a protest, if you understand what I'm asking?
There's no administrative rule stating the procedural deadline to protest. Simply, it's trying to fit it in with the two statutory deadlines, and mainly looking at the 180-day statutory deadline for the commission to make a decision on the application.
So how does the commission generally arrive at a date by which a protestant must file a protest by?
The commission just looks at all the factors, including the date that the application was received, and then potentially looking out at the 60-day time window that we must hold a hearing once we receive protest, again, to meet our statutory deadlines, to make our decision within that 180 days. So it's simply looking backwards from that 180 deadline to make sure all parties are afforded process in these applications.
So as I understood from Mr. Windsor's public comment this morning, that the commission has set various deadlines for Class D cases ranging from 2 weeks to 3 weeks to other weeks.
That is correct.
Okay, I have a question about the application itself that's been filed, and this is a bit off topic for the motion, but I do have a question about, I still have a question in my mind about jurisdiction of the commission here. So can you explain to the commission exactly what Clydesdale is seeking to do as part of their application, if you know?
Yeah, from, again, my understanding of the application is that they are seeking to, as part of their business, haul garbage from the places that they are cleaning out to a transfer facility.
Okay, are they looking to do curbside type pickups though?
That was not my understanding of the application. But again, I believe that may be sorted out throughout the docket process.
Okay. Additional discussion? Mr. Panochi?
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you feel Clydesdale is offering a service that no one else offers right now?
I cannot speak to that in terms of
Mr. Hamilton, could you come forward?
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner Pochi, I don't know that we can answer that question at this point because that'll take some development of a factual record about what other parties are providing for services. So it'd be difficult for us to say that there's no other service provider within the service territory that they're requesting that can provide this service. I would also add just a little bit of gloss, if I could, to the last question, because I do believe we heard from Mr. Windsor this morning that he provides the cleanup inside the house, the removal of that junk. And I could be misremembering things here, but I believe he also mentioned that he provides a weekly pickup service, which would be more traditional garbage hauling service, the sort of curbside service that we think of when we think of a garbage hauling service. So if that could be clarified as part of an amendment to the application or some other representations in writing, part of the record from the applicant, I think that could go a long ways toward answering this jurisdictional question. I would also note that the commission has a series of administrative rules that establish when the transportation service is incidental to some other principal type of business. And so I would also say it's difficult for us to apply those rules right now without more evidence of the particular business here. And so anything that the parties can do in this case to elaborate that would be beneficial for the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Additional discussion? Vice President, go ahead. Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would it be problematic if we defer this matter and get some clarification on whether this applicant even needs a PCN license, find out what the principal part of the business is and get that clarification you're discussing before we, continue on with admitting parties and so forth?
Mr. President, Vice President, I think it's an interesting idea. We do have statutory deadlines that we would have to meet here, and that we have received, at least if the commission accepts it, a late protest, which requires us to schedule a hearing within 60 days. In the interest, of course, behind those short deadlines is to protect an applicant who is trying to get up and running with theoretically investments already made in assets that would otherwise be sitting idle until the commission grants authority. But I also think that the factors that are laid out in our administrative rules for applying that, what we call the primary business test, are fact intensive. So it will require some presentation of evidence on the part of an applicant to establish what is their primary business under that test. And because that will involve some presentation of evidence, it also, in my mind, makes sense to have all the parties involved to present the evidence that they believe is relevant to that factual question of whether the primary business test is met. Now, I will say that the commission could, if it is so inclined, sort of bifurcate this process and have an initial examination of your jurisdiction to consider the Class D application. And if you determine that there is a Class D necessity here, you could then have a separate proceeding, a separate process, a separate hearing for the full presentation of the traditional elements of our Class D test.
Mr. President,
Follow up.
I think there's some uncertainty here as to whether or not this applicant even requires a license from the commission. And I think it would be in the best interest of all parties if we would gather more information and before we make a determination on today's motion. So I'm going to withdraw my motion, Mr. President.
Okay. So at this point, we're in limbo here. Is there, are you, okay, so I will recognize that the motion is withdrawn. Are you proposing to defer this matter?
Yes, I would propose that we defer and give staff the direction to try to ascertain more information for us so we can have clarity the next time we put this on the agenda or they make a recommendation to us. So all parties will know what we're dealing with here, whether we're dealing with an application, it's a statute or we're not.
Okay, so there's a motion to defer. So is there a second? I'll recognize Commissioner O'Donnell. So we do have a motion and a second. I do have a question for you, Mr. Hamilton. So as I understand the way that the Class D process works, well, I'm going to do that in reverse. Please explain to me how the 180-day deadline works.
Mr. President, the 180-day deadline is measured from the receipt of the application. So once the application is complete, we have the application fee, the full application, supporting materials. That's when our 180 days begins.
And so in this particular case, when was the application received? Do you know offhand? Mr. Palco, maybe you can answer that.
We received the application on December 12th of 2022.
So I'm based on that answer, I'm going to support this motion. The request that's being made of the commission is for late intervention. I have certainly made it publicly known that I do not support parties coming in and file late interventions in matters when it may result in a delay to a proceeding. Certainly, we're being asked by the moving parties in this case to let them into this case at this point. And so I don't see any harm to the moving parties by delaying this matter so that we may consider it more. Additional discussion, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Being the 180-day limit and we're well into that time period, would the maker of the motion put a time limit on that for perhaps 2 weeks? is 2 weeks, do you think sufficient to establish that?
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, I think it depends a lot on the parties here. And I would also note that the commission is not meeting next week, so your next business meeting would not be until the 21st. I think that 2 weeks would be a difficult timeline in general to meet.
Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, Mr. Hamilton, can the parties waive that 180-day period? If they're okay with that, is it okay to extend the 180-day period?
Mr. President, Vice President, yes.
The applicant, I mean.
We have traditionally considered the applicant as the party that benefits from these deadlines of being able to get a speedy resolution of their application. So if an applicant is willing to waive either the 60-day deadline for a hearing after measured from the date of the protest, or the 180-day commission decision deadline, both of those are statutory, but within the rights of the applicant to waive.
So just to be clear, if the applicant found that this was to their advantage to allow us to flesh this out better, they could waive the timeframes. Is that correct?
Mr. President, Vice President, that is a yes, that is correct.
Additional discussion, questions? All right, all those in favor of the Vice President's motion to defer this matter to a later date unstated, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, the motion to defer carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Falco, Mr. Hamilton. All right, let's move to work session item number 2. This is docket 2022.06.067 Northwestern Energy application for an advanced metering opt-out tariff. This is to just, we're here to decide Northwestern Energy's motion to stay. Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President and Commissioners. We're going to try something unique here. We have a fairly unique motion in front of the commission at this point. You'll recall from last week that it was raised at the end of the evidentiary hearing on AMI. So we have oral arguments recorded from both parties in this one. And rather than try to do justice to their arguments by summarizing it myself, I think that it's worth the brief investment of time to just re-listen to the arguments as presented by the parties. And at that point, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have in the process of deciding the particular motion. So with the President's indulgence, I believe we're ready to stream.
Please proceed.
So to the motion portion, I would move that the commission stay the docket for 90 days and give us a chance to do better. To come back with a proposal that hopefully we can get to common ground with the MCC on the AMR issue, at least. Try to figure out what does it look like post meter fail? Do you replace that meter with AMR? Is that even possible for us? What does that cost structure look like? I think that our conversation yesterday and today have been incredibly informative. I would recommend that we hold this docket open and that we refile a proposal and or a settlement in this docket. So this work has not been for naught. It has had an incredible amount of value and we appreciate the conversation, but I would really like an opportunity for us to try again. We filed our proposal, we had 180 days and we worked hard at it and we put a lot of company resources behind it. And it just wasn't part of my experience with the regulatory process, with the legislation. The retention of that meter was not part of what I thought was important. And I was wrong. And so I would hope that the commission would give us the benefit of a little bit of time to do it better. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, you've heard the motion. Any response to that?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm going to oppose the motion, which I normally wouldn't do for routine utility filing. But I don't see this as a routine utility filing. I see this as implementation of a state policy that's been in the works for years now. With all due respect to Ms. Hyman Northwestern, I really feel like there's no excuse for missing the explicit language in this commission's rule, which the company was well aware of and commented on. I believe that declining installation of an advanced metering device and retaining the existing meter has been in the law now it's been in the law in the commission's rules since December 11th of 2021. I'm sensitive to the statement that this proposal could have been done better, and I appreciate the willingness to try to make it better, and would like to go along with that, but I'm not going to, because I feel like it's not fair to consumers who have been waiting for clarity on this. And although those consumers who we're clearly focused on, who simply want to retain their existing meter, would be, I think, okay in the meantime, those consumers who want a meter as defined in 69-4-1001 would be in a position of continuing to wait and not have that option until, and all as a result of the company's failure to read the rule and make a proposal in line with the legislative intent in the rule. So I think that the ball is in this commission's court for a reason at this point. I think the legislature has put this ball in your court, and your rule gave the company 180 days to make this filing. So this is, I believe, a time-sensitive matter, especially for those customers who would like to opt out and receive a non-communicating digital meter. So I'm going to oppose the motion. And I would also just add that, utilities are free to file practically whatever they want in front of regulatory commissions, whether they're supported or not. So I think it's important to keep in mind that Northwestern can come back and initiate a new proposal any day they want to. And in the meantime, I guess I don't want to be complicit in taking this matter out of this commission's hands after it's, I think, been placed in your hands for very deliberately. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm prepared to rule on.
All right, Mr. President, just to close it up, in case it wasn't abundantly clear from the context, the first voice you heard there, and for the people in the room who don't get the benefit of the video, was Shannon Heim on behalf of Northwestern, and then, of course, Jason Brown on behalf of MCC. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, are you ready to entertain a motion?
Yes.
Mr. President, I move to deny Northwestern Energy's motion to stay and proceed with our regular docket procedural schedule and move into post-hearing briefs under ARM 38.2.4503. Continue on this docket.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Commissioner O'Donnell has seconded. Discussion, Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the motion that was made, but I tend to concur with CC. We should move this along and get it resolved as quickly and as well as we can. It has been an issue that's been lingering for more than, I think, 2 years now, since uncertainty first arose in the legislative definition of what an AMI is. And there are an awful lot of people that we've been hearing from that do want certainty. They do want clarification. I'm sure the utility would appreciate having that clarification as well. So I think that this is probably the best way to get to that point. I think we have enough information. I think we had a really robust hearing. Proceed with the docket and come to some closure on it without delaying for another 90 days.
Additional discussion? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. my support of this motion to deny the other motion is basically birthed in my great respect for the legal abilities of Northwestern Energy, that this was not a simple misunderstanding, that my regard for Northwestern's abilities is such that I find this to be pretty inexcusable, that the plain language of the statute was basically ignored. And so I will support this motion.
Additional discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Vice President Fielder's motion to deny signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, the Vice President's motion carries. All right, let's move to work session item number 3. This is the legislative update. Mr. Rosequist, I believe. We're here to discuss bills relevant to legislative bills relevant to the PSC mission, statutory authority, administrative processes, and general agency concerns, which will include possible discussions of PSC budget request presentation, and to consider staff analysis and recommendation, and to get direction on PSC positions and response to legislative bills. Mr. Rosequist.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to be working off of a brief memo that I circulated to the commission yesterday afternoon. Just wanted to provide an update on several bills that the commission is already following, and then summarize a couple new bills that have shown up. First off, Mr. President, House Bill 52. We've talked about this several times before. This is a PSE bill that eliminates common carrier provisions from Title 69, Chapter 11. That bill is sponsored by Representative Katie Zolnikoff. It's a PSE bill that went through the ETIC process. That bill has passed out of the House now and is in the Senate Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And there is a hearing on that bill this afternoon. And President Brown and myself will attend that hearing. Next, House Bill 284. This is the pre-approval bill. It addresses the finding of a district court that, as currently written, the pre-approval provisions in 69.8.421 are unconstitutional, and it does that by expanding the scope of the applicability of that statute to include Montana Dakota utilities. There was a hearing on that bill on January 25th. And as the memo indicates, there were 17 proponents and 1 opponent. The proponents included the utilities, Northwestern Energy and MDU, various economic development interests, and the labor unions. And then the opponent was the Montana Environmental Information Center, who stated that they opposed the bill insofar as it permits pre-approval for opportunity resources that don't go through a competitive solicitation process. The Montana Consumer Council and PSC staff appeared as informational at that hearing. Senate Bill 178, sponsored by Senator Daniel Zolnikoff, prohibits the commission from establishing a rate classification for digital asset mining or cryptocurrency mining that creates discriminatory rates. A hearing was held on that bill on February 2nd. Proponents included Satoshi Action Fund, which is a Bitcoin mining advocacy organization, and Americans for Prosperity. Opponents included the Montana League of Cities and Towns, American Civil Liberties Union, and the Montana Environmental Information Center, and Gary Mattson. And I would just note that the MEIC opposed the bill on similar grounds as staff discussed at the last work session, in the sense that the way the bill defines discriminatory rates may be inconsistent with common understanding of discriminatory rates in traditional regulation. 2 new bills then.
Hold on, Mr. Rosequist. Colleagues, I also watched the hearing in SB 178 and have reached out to the bill sponsor, Daniel Zolnikov, about what Mr. Rosequist just mentioned, the definition of discrimination in that bill. And I would move to have the agency take a position where we work with the bill sponsor to modify or amend that legislation.
Is that a motion, Mr. President?
It is.
I'll second your motion.
Discussion? I would just note that in my discussion with Senator Zolnikov, he is open to having the PSC's input on his legislation to make it better and more palatable. So I don't think Senator Zolnikov will take our actions as as hostile. Additional discussion? All right, all those in favor of my motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. Continue on, Ms. Rosequist.
Thank you, Mr. President. SB 242 revises avoided cost rate making in section 69.8603. It requires the commission to calculate the cost of integrating PURPA qualifying facilities into the transmission system and to subtract that cost from the value of avoided cost rates. The revisions define integration costs as the incremental cost for balancing, operating reserves, load following, and grid costs. Staff has had some back and forth on this bill, and I think the main issue that we would have with it is this term grid costs, which isn't defined anywhere. We're not sure what it might refer to. As the commission's aware, we've had several PURPA proceedings that have involved disputes over interconnection network upgrade costs, transmission service network upgrade costs. We're not sure whether this term grid costs applies to that. Most of the other terms refer to ancillary services, which has also been a subject of debate in several PURPA proceedings, but we understand what those terms are referring to, but this term grid costs, we're not sure about. So that would be one possible area of concern on that bill. And then SB 255, revising electric vehicle charging laws.
Well, question on the 242, please. Do you see in any part of this language right here, is it in complete agreement with FERC's definition of the rules of PURPA? It sounds like there might be some areas for litigation if the state law detracts from federal guidelines, federal directions, I should say.
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, as I said, the term grid cost isn't defined in Montana law. It's not a term that's used in the federal regulations either. The term that is in our rules and in federal regulations is interconnection costs. At least as I'm interpreting what grid costs might be referring to. So again, I think staff has some worries about potential ambiguity in the commission having to interpret what grid costs means in the context of federal regulations and PSC regulations that use the term interconnection costs, and whether those terms are synonymous or whether something else is meant by the Montana law. So potentially there is room for litigation there, but I would defer to your legal counsel on that.
Thank you.
SB 255, again, revising electric vehicle charging laws, introduced by Senator Christopher Pope. It revises Montana Code Section 69.8.801 to require public utilities to provide electric service to electric vehicle service providers at rates that are approved by the commission, and the commission is required to design rates for electric vehicle service providers pursuant to Title 69, Chapter 3, Part 3, which covers rate making procedures. So we would be employing already existing rate making procedures to set rates for electric vehicle service providers. And the revisions also allow a public utility to operate as an electric vehicle service provider. This bill has been referred to the Senate Energy and Telecommunications Committee, has not yet been scheduled for a hearing. And staff has not met or otherwise discussed this bill at this time. Given that we don't anticipate a business meeting next week, staff can perhaps try to look at it and send out a memo or an email in case we need an out of cycle business meeting to talk about it. But at this time, I don't personally have really any concerns with that.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. So, yeah, since you haven't had the time to look into it, you can't really answer any questions, but the concerns that I would have, whether or not the bill is contemplating a separate charge for, let's say, the town pump has or a hotel, has EV charging stations right there, that the utility would charge them a separate, distinct charge for that. But then you also have the home charging systems. It would seem to me to be incredibly burdensome to the utility. And if they had to, in a private residence, if they had to meter household use and meter EV charging use, be separate meters and all that, it would be simply complicated. So I'd be interested in finding out what this bill really talks about in terms of commercial and residential uses.
Mr. President, Commissioner O'Donnell, we can certainly take another look at it. I would say from my look at it so far, it doesn't directly answer that question. It's not clear that the bill would mandate a separate rate classification at this time. It may be that as electric vehicle service providers, whether they're existing commercial entities such as gas stations or something, start to provide that service, that the utility will be monitoring the load profiles of those customers and may at some date propose a separate rate classification, or perhaps the businesses themselves request separate metering for their electric service provider, electric vehicle service providing activities. But there's no explicit direction that the commission undertakes some kind of a rate making process within any specific amount of time. It just authorizes this activity and requires the commission to set rates, which we already do for various customer classes.
Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, given what we've heard here, I wonder if it would be appropriate to send PSC staff as informational on this in case technical questions arise when this bill gets a hearing. I guess, Mr. Rosequist, do you feel that would be appropriate and helpful to the committee, or is this so far out of our area that we can't really help?
I'm happy to attend as an informational witness to the extent that the committee ends up having questions regarding PSC rate making that would be helpful to them.
I'll go ahead and move that we, the president, designate an informational witness to testify on behalf of the commission to help answer questions on Senate Bill 255.
Second.
A motion and second discussion on that. I'll just designate you then, Mr. Rosequist, if this motion passes. All those in favor of the vice president's motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries. All right, any other matters, Mr. Rosequist?
No, Mr. President, thank you.
I would just note for the record for those that were following what was happening with Class D bills. Both of those bills, Bill 278, and I can't, the other one was Bill 191, were tabled in the House Energy Committee. Commissioner Pinochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion for the Public Service Commission to vote on and support HB 284. Thank you.
Is there a second? Well, I'll second just to have the discussion. All right. So we have a motion and a second. Can you tell us what HB 284 is, Commissioner Pinochi?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I have a message here from Jerry Scherlinger, the bill's sponsor, representative inside my district. He said this bill will allow the PSC to give utility providers some assurance that their new sources of production or transmission will likely be allowed into their rate base for rate recovery when it comes online. This will enable the provider more access to capital and also provide greater price and supply stability for the energy consumers. So I support getting this out in the open to talk about, and would certainly support a friendly amendment if there's an issue we need to work out with Representative Scherlinger on improving this bill. I was there during the testimony given, and there was a large amount of support. And I'd like to remind everybody that Mr. Scherlinger's district had power shut off on purpose during the Texas outage and brought that up. And I think that the ratepayers feel that if there is more energy being produced in Montana, there's a better chance of their rates coming down. I support this and support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinochi. Questions or discussion on this legislation? Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I suppose I would like, well, our legal counsel is here and we have our president here as well. I'd just like a little bit of guidance on, given that there's litigation on this subject matter, whether it would be advisable for the commission to render, support or opposition to this bill.
Mr. President and Vice President, it's an interesting question. You'll recall that at present, the litigation concerning the pre-approval statute, which is what this bill would address, is currently pending in front of the Montana Supreme Court. The basis for the declaration earlier, the district court's declaration, was that the law was effectively a special franchise and privilege. It was a law tailored to exactly one party and one party alone, was therefore unconstitutional. My understanding of this bill is that it endeavors to effectively moot that litigation by removing that uniqueness of the statute, that it would only apply to one party. The state of Montana is still currently participating in that proceeding, defending the statute as it is currently written. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any reason why a formal position on this bill would affect the litigation position of the state of Montana, notwithstanding the fact that the commission is not participating in that litigation anymore. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Additional discussion, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Well, for what we know from what Will has put together on this bill, it seems to me that this is quite a reasonable approach to the subject, and as long as there is no repercussions on the case in front of the court now, I think that this would be appropriate for the commission to adopt it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell. So Just clarifying question for you, Commissioner Pernocci. So your motion is to have the commission support House Bill 280.
Yes, Mr. President, that's exactly what I asked for.
Okay. Additional discussion? All right, I'm going to weigh in this. I am going to oppose this motion, Commissioner Pernocci, graciously. And certainly this is no affront to Representative Schillinger, who I like very much. I just believe it's in the best interest of this agency and appropriate with our regulatory mission to not weigh in on this legislation. And my general thinking on that is that should this legislation pass, we will be asked to apply it. And I don't want to have the commission be put in a position where we are applying a law that, and we've done this in the past, certainly as a commission, but in this case, applying a law that we supported at the legislature. I think it puts the commission in a bad position for public perception purposes when acting on a pre-approval application. I think it's better if the commission just stays in a neutral position on this and lets the legislature decides the merits of the public policy in this matter. So I will be opposing. Additional discussion. Commissioner Pernocci.
The ratepayer is looking for us to support lower cost. I believe that House Bill 284 supports that possibility. So is there an amendment could be made to work with the bill sponsor that might put us in a better position to support the bill? Any thoughts on that from anyone?
Rosequist, do you want to take a stab at that? You're certainly authorized to decline to comment if you.
Mr. President, I guess I would just note that the amendments, the bill itself is very simple and straightforward and accomplishes the objective, which is to expand the scope so that pre-approval applies to more than one utility. So I think the issue of whether this current statute on pre-approval is in the ratepayer's best interest is a much larger conversation that probably we couldn't have at this point in time.
Commissioner Bukacek.
Based on what you were saying about the future, I think it will be very difficult to avoid this appearing as a conflict of interest. So I would vote against it.
Vice President Fielder.
Mr. President, unfortunately, I'm tilting that way as well. I appreciate Commissioner Pernocci's motion and Representative Schillinger's effort here. I think it will be helpful for the legislature to address this because I noticed it quite a while ago when I was in the legislature. This did not seem like proper statute because it did specifically have sideboards in it that made it applicable to just one company in Montana. And so I'm glad to see the legislature attempting to address this. I have a feeling they'll be able to address it without us weighing in on it. And I think it's probably advisable for us to stay on the sidelines on this one at this point, especially.
Mr. Hamilton, did you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just I would encourage the commission to be careful about statements about the current law that is under the district court's order invalid, just because that is currently pending and the state is still trying to defend that law.
You're here. Commissioner Nochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for Lucas Hamilton. Should I tell the representative that this is a conflict of interest? Or is it not a conflict of interest to support this bill?
Mr. President, Commissioner Pinocci, I think that there's a respectful disagreement on the commission right now about the appearance of the commission going in to support or oppose or take any position necessarily on this bill. So I would leave it to the commission to decide what the most appropriate tact is here.
Follow up.
Commissioner Pinocci.
I don't believe it's a conflict of interest.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So I just wanted to clarify that the motion is to have the commission support this bill. Should this fail, it doesn't mean that we oppose the bill, just that we have declined to take a position on the bill. And so I think in that regard that I still favor the motion. It seems to me that the pre-approval process is healthy for ratepayers and gives certainty to all parties in the process. And I appreciate the author of the bill to directly confront the reason that the court declared it to be unconstitutional. A very, very simple fix on this. So I still support it, but I just wanted to point out that this does not, if the motion fails, as seems to be, that this would indicate any lack of support for the bill itself, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. I echo the sentiments you made. The position of the commission right now is to not have a position on the bill. And so if this motion fails, that would be the default position of the commission. All right, I think this has been discussed. So I'm going to suggest we do a roll call vote on this. Are you ready, Patricia? All right, Vice President Fielder.
No.
Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Pinocci,
Yes.
Commissioner Bukacek,
No,
and I am a no. Motion fails on a 3-2 vote. Additional legislation discussion. I would just note, was that you?
Yeah.
Would Commissioner Bukacek?
I was going to ask if I could, Mr. President, if I could ask Mr. Roskus a question about Senate Bill 178.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Do it now. Okay, so this business of defining discrimination, I know that these the digital asset mining, they use a tremendous amount of electricity, more than small countries, some of them. So I'm just wondering, there is potential that it could require another classification, correct? Because the classification is not just based on specific industrial uses of electricity in similar geographic areas, but to some extent, the different classifications are based on the use of electricity, correct?
Mr. President, Commissioner Bukacek, it is possible. I think during the hearing, there was a fair amount of discussion from the proponents regarding sort of the unique characteristics of Bitcoin mining operations, in the sense that they indicated that some of them can be used for demand response during emergency periods or something. And I think that those arguments, sort of cemented my concern with the way the bill as currently written defines discriminatory rates, because it seems to say that those Bitcoining operations would have to be charged rates similar to other industrial loads that may not have those same characteristics or that same flexibility. And so the commission would want to have the flexibility to and the utility would want to have the flexibility to set rates or classify service according to the unique characteristics of those uses.
Vice President Fielder.
On another topic, Mr. President, if we're ready to move on to a different bill.
Yes, of course.
Okay, House Bill 2. I just wanted to let the commission know that in conferring with our fiscal staff, there's probably an amendment that we'd like to get through on that, and that is to change the classification of the Ready software relicensing or licensing fee to unrestricted biennial. I think it's in there right now as restricted, and it's just for 1 year. And so under the advice of Ms. Litschauer, I'd like commission's approval to request an amendment to House Bill 2 to make the Ready software license funding line unrestricted biennial.
I'll second that motion. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the Vice President's motion to change the nature of our request regarding the Ready project signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries. Other legislation? I would just note one bill that just to put on the list, if you will. I'm not asking the commission to take a position on this, but I did watch the hearing on House Bill 348, which is sponsored by Kenny Walsh of Madison County. And this is a bill that would have an impact on the agency, even though we're complying with this law if it's passed. House Bill 348 would require state government employee directories to be posted on state agency websites such that a member of the public could figure out who to call if they have a specific question beyond just the general line, if you will, of the agency. I after listening to this, I went and checked our website. We are already complying with this, so I don't think there's any impact to our agency, but I think this would be a good one to just put on the list. Additional bills? Okay. All right. That moves us off the work session portion. I would just note for the public that again, 3 o'clock House Bill 52, which is one of the PSC's bills, will be heard at the Capitol Building, room 317. The subcommittee F PSC work sessions have shifted, as I understand it, from Wednesday, February 8th and 9th to Friday, the 10th and Monday, the 13th. Is that correct, Vice President Fielder?
Mr. President, I would defer to our executive director to confirm or deny that, since the dates have been moving targets. I know that it has been moved away from February 8th and 9th, though.
Mr. Cheatham?
Thank you, Mr. President. My understanding is that the work session for section F is the 13th.
Okay.
And for section D is the 14th and potentially the 15th. The work session for section F could also carry over to the 14th, but I don't think it's very likely.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cheetah. Then I would note that there will be no business meeting next Tuesday, the 14th, Valentine's Day. So our next commission business meeting is now slated for Tuesday, February 21st, 2023. And I would note the time of 1:30 p.m., 1:30 p.m., not our regularly scheduled 9:30 a.m. Seeing no further business to, Commissioner O'Donnell.
For the public, just people making connections, we are not having a meeting because it's Valentine's Day. But because our National Association is having one of their annual meetings and 3 commissioners will be attending.
Thank you. I think they would have preferred that we not have it because we're having Valentine's Day. Any further business to come before the commission? All right, ending on a little jocularity. The time is now 10:45 a.m. I will adjourn today's business meeting.